welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, Giallo enthusiasts, avid readers of horror. I don't know. I'm still working on this new intro for the reading. Anyways, the next three chapters of Cruising by Gerald Walker, 1970. This would be beginning with chapter 7, which is the John Lynch chapter. And in this chapter, John Lynch is sitting at home. Forgot to mention this in the previous section with John Lynch, although, to be fair, it's not something that you really think about until you realize it in this chapter. But contrary to the book, or sorry, to the film, he's actually not living in the area that he's supposed to be patrolling. If you've seen the movie first, you might assume that went with it. But if you haven't seen the movie and you're just reading the book, you probably wouldn't expect him to be living there because it's, only in the movie that you really get that. But he's sitting at home and he gets a phone call from Captain Idelson, who tells him, hey, there was another killing last night. That means there's been a follow-up killing a week after the other recent one, which means this guy is breaking his pattern. He's killing more frequently. I need you and all the other decoys to now move yourselves into your areas and actually live there. I can't afford for you to lose any time going home and coming back. You need to just be in it. And John Lynch kind of has a problem with this. He's like, what are you saying? I'm not in it already. So after a little bit of back and forth, he essentially agrees. I mean, there's nothing he can do. He can't really say no. So those killings are going on the north side and then the south side. So he's kind of doing this alternating pattern. And then when Edelson hangs up the phone, John relives this memory, which comes up as far as how he feels about the situation, in which it was a summer and he was with his uncle and his mom and his Aunt Catherine and his cousins, who I think his cousins are all women, or his sisters. But essentially, it's he's the only guy along with his uncle. And he's out with he's following his Uncle Phil around. If his uncle wants him to go get him a beer, go get him his pipe, he's following him. He just wants to be hanging out with the dudes. And his uncle's friends, all from the police department or the fire department, they're playing this game, so to speak, where they drink a bunch of rye and then swim across the lake to the uncle's place, and then proceed to drink, I think it was said to be a quart of beer each. Then they swim back again, finish off the rye, and then have an Indian wrestling contest, which, even though I was a fan of professional wrestling for a very long time, I can't say I ever learned what an Indian wrestling match is, regardless. And so in the course of doing this, one of his uncle's friends somehow asks about why John's not getting in the water, or if he can swim, and he says, I can't swim. But he kind of leans more on the side of, I just don't want to get wet. And they kind of threaten that they're going to throw him in the lake, and this will be a learning lesson for him. And he's very uncomfortable with this, terrified, and he looks to his uncle, and his uncle is intentionally avoiding eye contact with him because he's hanging out with his buddies, and they're the most important thing versus what his nephew might want. And so they throw him like ass over head into the water, and he starts treading water, and he's essentially drowning, and he's screaming out, and his uncle's not helping him. He's just hanging out with his buds. And then his mom, his aunt, and his, again, I can't remember if they're his cousins or his sisters, but all the girls and women come out. And once this sight, once the uncle sees this, then he jumps in the water, saves the kid, and then he kind of says something to his friends about, essentially like, oh, let me calm down all these hysterical women. And John notices a shamed look on his uncle. And he wonders what it is, if it's his uncle feels ashamed at him, at John, because he doesn't know how to swim and because he reacted this way, or if it's something more, if he actually feels ashamed at himself because he broke the trust that this little boy had in the uncle that he idolized. And so it's really sad in terms of that, like just how shit like that can happen. Like a kid can grow up looking up to someone, in this case a little boy looking up to a father figure, looking up to a male role model, and in one drunken escapade he completely destroys that. The uncle completely burns that bridge. So then there's this great quote that I had written down. It's when other people thought of drowning, they thought of water. He thought of clouds. And there's a lot to that. Initially, that is just the idea of like, well, if you think about drowning, if you've never experienced almost drowning, you probably think, oh, water. And it's like for him, it was like, no, all he could do was look up. And this situation he compares to what Edelson is doing, where Edelson is essentially throwing him into the unknown and forcing him to sink or swim. Really good chapter, really short, and moves on to the next Captain Edelson diary entry. Okay, chapter 8 in Edelson's diary, which I should have mentioned really earlier, that these have a very stream of consciousness aspect about them. It kind of reminds me of morning journaling, if you've ever done that, where something we had to do at the acting conservatory I went to in the first year. It was like a lesson of like how to kind of tap into the unfiltered unconscious, I think, is how you would say it, where you wake up and first thing you do before you go to the bathroom, before you do anything, before your feet really even hit the ground, is pull out this morning journal and just write. I think you're supposed to do it for like 5 minutes or something and just let the thoughts come out. You can even just be like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, completely unfiltered. And then funny thing was that the teachers don't actually read it. They just kind of look to make sure that you actually were writing, which is good because I'm following orders. I'm just writing, and I'm talking about people that piss me off. I'm talking about girls. I'm talking about dreams I had. I'm talking about anything that I probably wouldn't want to share. But that's kind of how the diary reads a little bit, is that he's just spewing. And so he's talking about the strategy. They've already gotten results, but it's an extra body. He says there's only so much he can do. If they'd given him 100 cops, he could probably have better results, but he's got to make do with 10. He mentions how he's having to use negative incentive on them, on his decoys. Like, the sooner you can solve this, the sooner you can return to normal life. And then it's funny because he mentions John Lynch being upset that he had to call him and wake him up. And the one thing that's probably a little unrealistic about the notebooks are, he only really, if I remember correctly, he only really names John, because obviously John Lynch is the only character we have to go off of, and it's probably, he seems to always be writing this after having encounters with him, but he never is like, oh, John was hard to deal with. Why can't he be more like Ryan? He doesn't name any other names. So it's kind of seems like it's all for the benefit of the reader in terms of not confusing them. Yep, he mentions that it's difficult to lead this, but he'll do it, and he's going along for the ride as much as they are. Other than that, it's very short. That's kind of all there is That's really it. It's so very short. Again, his sections in the book are his chapters are only ever like 2 to 4 pages, maybe 5 pages. That's like the most. I think there might be a longer one, but as of my rereading it now, going chapter by chapter, they're incredibly short. But they're interesting because they give you his psyche, his perspective, and I will say you probably could cut them, but it reminds me, this might sound a little pretentious, kind of reminds me of like having ginger when you pickled ginger when you go to have sushi. His sections are kind of like the palate cleanser between John Lynch and Stuart Richards, and he is in between them. Although once you reset, you're going from Stuart Richards to John Lynch, which is interesting. But yeah, so his chapters are not long to read. They only ever take like 5 minutes to read. But yeah, so I'm probably talking more than how long it took to read that section. Anyways, onto the Stuart Richards chapter of this third run through. Okay, chapter 9. This is the third run of Stuart Richards, unless you want to say fourth in counting the prologue. So interesting. Again, he is, for like several pages, he's giving an analysis of the third man. He begins by talking about Alfred in that same kind of odd way, where it's like he reveres him, but he also kind of is condescending about him. It's odd. One thing I keep forgetting to mention some things. I forgot to mention the last Stuart Richards chapter that he clearly has some sort of envy towards Alfred and how Alfred kind of has his shit together more so than he does. And in the last chapter, he mentioned that Alfred would probably be the ideal son to Stuart's father, you know, because he knows that he's just a disappointment to his old man. But going forward in this chapter, he talks about Alfred. Alfred has, you know, will sometimes don this smile, which again comes back to the smile. And he goes through this whole breakdown in reliving parts of the third man. And he's talking about this part with Joe Cotton and yada yada. And this part with, he talks about the really famous, one of the, well, it's got a lot of famous parts in the movie, but the part when you first see Orson Welles in Vienna and like the music crescendos, and he has this little like innocent boy smile, and he starts remarking on that smile. And then there's an interesting part where he talks about like the Western style showdown in this, you know, in Eastern Europe. um he then starts talking about Terry, his ex-girlfriend, and how she kind of just unceremoniously, just in his, you know, eyes, she just kind of rudely broke things off with him. And I think she'd written him a letter because he's quoting her. And I don't think they had this conversation in person. I think she wrote him a letter, and how, or he's like imagining her saying these things, but knowing that he'll, you know, he'll be fine. He'll get on along without her. But it's going to be hard for him. You know, he's not living there anymore. He must be living somewhere else. That I think she did write this then. She was pregnant, and she decided not to go see an abortionist. So she decides not to have an abortion, and he then goes through this whole thing of like, do you have to be a father to be a man? Well, I'm not a son. Um, he mentions that by this time, by now, he imagines the kid would be born, and he has no idea if it is his, because he reveals that Terry was actually married. So she was carrying on some affair, and knowing her, she could have been stringing some other guy along. He uses the word castrating some other guy. And we find out that she broke things off with him right before Thanksgiving. And so he mentions like shortly after on Thanksgiving, he went out and he met the partridge, who he refers to as his first victim, which he mentions was a professor. So that's a similarity between the movie and the book, is that the first victim was a professor. I don't know if he knows this professor like in the movie. That was the connection. It was kind of like the thing in Silence of the Lambs where they talk about the Buffalo Bill killer, um, Hannibal Lecter mentions to look closer at the first victim, because typically with serial killers, the first victim is somebody they knew, and then they kind of go off and start killing random people. So I'm not sure as of now if the professor was a professor of Stewart's or he just knew about him by proxy, but similarity there, but for the book. And he also is blaming Terry for being complicit in the murders because she caused him to do this. He's blaming her. She might as well have put the knife in his hand. Yeah, the guy's clearly fucked up. Then we get this bit where he's reflecting on the recent murder that he just did, and he, for some reason, mistakes his own memory, thinking that he killed the guy he called Dad's, and he's talking about how he plunged the knife in, and he had this smile that then turned into an O face as he's like, the way he put it, squeezed out one final turd of a moan, and he's just like mocking the guy and everything. Then all of a sudden he goes, "Wait, no, I didn't kill him. No, that's not right. No, I let him go. I killed this other guy." Um, Interesting. Why did he forget? And he mentions the other guy that he killed was like, told him he'd just blown a few guys before, and he was trying to make an even dozen before he heads back to Boston. And he's like, "Well, you're gonna miss that. You're gonna miss your return. I bet they still haven't found all your pieces yet." It's just fucking dark. So then we get this bit where he can hear, I mean, he's been able to hear Alfred outside his room, and I mean, I think he's like cooking or something, but he remarks how he sneezes 7 times, always 7 times, and he's he's like, "Oh, it's so rude, him being so loud at this time," and it's like midday, and he's like, "Doesn't he know there's people trying to masturbate in here?" And odd. So he's trying to jerk off in the middle of the day while Alfred's, everyone's doing their own thing. And so he sneezes 7 times and he says, "Bless you" 7 times. And then Alfred says, "Thank you" 7 times. And then he comes to his door and he asks him, "Hey, would I be able to, do you have some matches I could borrow?" And Stuart's like pondering, like, should I open the door like this? Just like naked? Well, so he opens the door. I think he throws something on, like his boxers. He answers the door, and Alfred is kind of like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He's like, it's fine, there's no one in here other than me. I'm trying to go without it for a week," meaning he's trying to not have sex for a week or whatever, trying to see if he can resist his urges. And Alfred asks him if he could, "Do you have any matches I could use?" And there's a little bit of a, stream of consciousness where he's explaining how Alfred served in Vietnam, and I can't tell if he is Asian looking, because Stewart describes him as having almond shaped eyes, which is a way of saying Asian eyes, for lack of a any better way to put it. And I think this is a point of also envy with Stewart, is that he was in the army, but he actually never left the country, whereas his roommate Alfred, who he kind of idolizes and also bashes a little bit for privately for being gay. Well, he actually served in Vietnam, so it's kind of like, well, what does that mean about you, type of thing. And so he goes to retrieve the matches, and he goes to his pants, which are hanging upside down, and he's fumbling, and all of a sudden a matchbox falls out that it was not what he was looking for, but it's from this jazz place which he's never been to. And so he realizes, "Oh shit, this must be from the guy I killed the other night. I must have taken this off of his body." And so he notices that Alfred sees it, and he just immediately takes it and throws it in the wastebasket, and he's like, "It's empty. Here, let me look around. Here you go." And he gives him some matches, and they talk about how Alfred is got couple more years left of his studies, and then he can probably like make professor. And he's gotta keep with his studies if he wants to keep receiving government money. And he offers him something like eggs or something, like if I can ever repay this. And he's like, well, you can try sneezing 6 or maybe 8 times anything but 7. And he's like, oh, you noticed. And they have this back and forth where it's like, so is he flirting with Alfred? It's weird. It's not weird like it's bad, but it's strange because knowing who Stewart is, to see him, it's like he's toying with this, possibility that this might be an aspect of him. Odd. Just like, why is he entertaining? I know. I think it's obviously there to, yeah, set up that he probably is gay. He probably part of him probably is gay or bisexual, and he has no problem clearly playing with it. And then he remarks that once he leaves, he thinks to himself like, well, that would have been embarrassing. Like, this is why you don't take souvenirs. Like, thank God I put the knife back in my underpants drawer, because if that fell out, that would have been really bad. And he takes the matchbook, takes a match out. There's actually matches in there, so he lied. Burns one, burns the rest of it, destroys the evidence. He remarks how Alfred has a smile, and he's just like, "What does that smile mean?" He keeps bringing up smiles. The knife and the smile, he thought, blade and teeth, threat and response, pursuer and pursued. It all came together somehow in knife and smile. And then he starts playing with the blade. Um, there's a way that he can kind of just like sling it out and then put it back and sling it back out. And you find out that through this next part of the chapter, like, this isn't a switchblade. This isn't like a regular like spring-loaded blade, because these are actually illegal in the state and probably elsewhere. But you find out how he's able to pull this off. So the knife, he bought the knife, he mentions, late November after Terry had moved out. The salesman was like Hungarian, he supposes, and he tells him that he's a writer, and so he needs to know how a knife feels, like the pulling it out, everything. He just needs to be able to understand it so he can write about it and in the point of view of his character. And he's essentially asking for a switchblade, something that can actually kind of just like out. And the salesman tells him, illegal, I can't do it. Like, I can't sell those. But if you want to know, you can go to the police station, and they'll probably be more than happy to show you switchblades and like how they work. And it's clear that he's obviously like, I mean, if he was just trying to go with that excuse, I'm a writer, I just need to feel it and see how it feels, he could do that. He clearly wants a knife, so he's kind of pushing to see if like if he will sell him anything like a switchblade or close. And the guy's telling him like, this is how you pull it out, like you dig your nail into this part, and then you kind of just like can um, release it. You kind of fling it out. And then he shows him that if you take a piece of paper, like peel off the end of like of a matchbook and make a U out of it, and you put that in the part of the blade where it's supposed to close shut, the U will catch the paper will catch the knife, and it won't actually retract all the way. So you do that, put it in your pocket, and then when you want to take it out fast, you basically take it, and then you're very easily able. You don't have to kind of work the knife out. The knife is actually ready to just kind of spring out because it wasn't retracted all the way. And he's like, so that's how you actually can make it a switchblade. Not say legally, but that's how you can make it a switchblade without it actually being a switchblade. So, yeah. And then there's an interesting bit where it's like the knives are made in Japan. The handle is bone. It's like 4 inches of steel that it's actually sharp. And then there's another few inches of just like the metal itself of the blade. Um, it's Italian, the metal or the craftsman work. Just like, okay, wait, so it's Italian and Japanese? Whatever, I don't know. And then Stewart refers to the blade, he's kind of calling it a tongue at first. And in the last chapter, there was this whole bit about, because he makes all these like sexual metaphors about, the blade kissing and licking and this tongue touching that tongue. And so he first calls it a tongue, and then he says, no, that's not right. That's too feminine, an erection. So he then calls it the blade an erection, and saying like that's perfect for the types of targets he's going to be going after. And yep. And then he goes back and he's thinking about the smile of his victims. He thinks about the smile he sees in The Third Man. He talks about how in Orson Welles' character is lying there and he smiles. He's kind of forgetting if he does smile, and he's mentioning that he will need to go back to the theater and like really see that and really kind of like focus on it. And then there's this quote that, because I'm reading this, I can't read this physically. The book is too expensive or it doesn't exist but I'm reading it off Kindle, and I guess people can like highlight things. And so there's a section that's been highlighted by numerous people. So I'll read that because it's pretty interesting. So he's referring to the smile, and he says, this last smile was more knowing, some crazy kind of satisfaction, relief that the whole charade was over. It's like he's potentially getting closer to finding the meaning of what it is. And that's interesting in terms of the characters in the movies and his victims and how he perceives them and how he, yeah. Anyways, the last thing he talks about in the last couple pages is how he's dreading that school is going to be ending soon once he eventually gets to the summer and once he graduates. Because, and I can resonate with this, when you're going to school, even, whether it's college, right, from being young, or you go back to school and you're kind of in your 20s or in your 30s. I imagine, I haven't been in school in my 30s, but I imagine if I were to go back, I would have the same feeling, is that when you're in school, you're kind of on like, um, you're living in like a delay. It's like, as long as you are enrolled, as long as you're still a student, life is on hold. And so he's really dreading that he's going to have to actually be thrown into the regular hustle and bustle of life. And he can't just be doing what he wants to anymore. He can't just be like killing time, going to the movies and waxing philosophical like frickin' Riley from Confederacy of Dunces. So yeah, because he loves his free time. And then the very final thing is he talks about having to go see The Third Man a final time, or not a final time, but again. So that's then chapter 9, and that's all I've got for this installment. Meet me again. We'll break down the next 3 chapters. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.